Morning and welcome. Great to be here and really delighted to be talking to you about marine energy. My name is Sue Bartlett-Reid. I have a long history. I originally started working in the oil and gas sector, so a lot of time on vessels, and then moved into policy in UK government in the early first rounds of fixed offshore wind, leading the team there that developed some of the areas around our shoreline that we're now seeing develop at an astronomical rate. But really what I'm here to talk to you today about is marine energy, specifically tidal stream energy, so not tidal range. We do work with wave and tidal stream as well, but to talk to you about where we're at with that industry, and interestingly, what we're likely to do next, what we need, and how the industry is growing. So, the UK Marine Energy Council that I'm representing today, we were established in 2018 as a response to the UK government's lack of revenue support for these innovative technologies. And ideally what we look to do was bring together our diverse range of technologies. So anybody who knows the sector, we really are very diverse. We have a number of different applications, a number of different companies, a number of different technologies working at scale to really try and deliver tidal stream energy. But we didn't have a single voice. We were very disparate in our ask to government, and in a challenging, very competitive renewable energy environment, it was critically important that we came together and spoke with one voice. So the Marine Energy Council was established at the All Energy Conference. We're now about 40 membership organisations coming together to talk to government about how we deliver this innovative technology in our marine environment in a sustainable way with sustainable revenue. So delivery of net zero, our oceans are going to play a key part in how we decarbonise our electricity system. And ideally, what we would like to see is wave and tidal play a role in that. The UK has some 50% of tidal stream available capacity in Europe, so we're absolutely key as an island nation with those areas of very high velocities of tidal streams. But we really have to think about this in the round, and I'm often asked, where does marine energy fit? Well, if we are to decarbonise our energy system, we really need to consider these systems in the round. We need to consider the value benefits that developing tidal stream technology brings to our energy system. And that's going to be critically important as we move forward through this discussion. How do we make sure that we have the right technologies coming on board in the right percentages, the right mix, to ensure that we have a viable energy system going forward? We're going to need significantly more electricity on our energy system than we have to date. That means we're going to need distributed generation around the Isles of the UK, we're going to need to balance the energy system, and we're going to need to find ways to utilise our existing skills, expertise, people and maritime knowledge to make sure that we have that economic growth and that we really embed GVA and socio-economic benefits. So we not only need to innovate in the wind space, the solar space, battery storage, demand side management, but we also need to innovate in terms of the technologies that we use. So generation technologies we know are going to have to increase incredibly fast to meet the need of this decarbonisation. We know that that clean energy deployment needs to come from the base of knowledge, and I always say when I speak on tidal energy, we have some of the best engineers, the best capability, the best marine operations anywhere in the world. And that's why we're leading in tidal technology at the moment. But what is it? What are we actually talking about? And it's very easy for me as an industry representative and someone who's been involved in the sector for about 24 years to discuss tidal energy from a technology perspective. But ultimately it's kinetic energy from fast-moving water. And we've engineered various ways since the Persian times, actually, to try and look at how we take that kinetic energy and convert it to electrons. And this is why we have the diversity of numerous devices. So tidal stream energy in its fundamental form is where we see high energy, high flow water, usually in geographically constrained water bodies, that gives significant speed and significant energy density to allow technologies to extract that kinetic energy and convert it into electrons. We've been developing this technology since the 1970s in the UK. Some of the early wave devices were funded by the UK government back in the 1970s when we established a marine energy programme that invested £15 million back in the 70s into wave technology, and Tidal has followed on from that. A lot of the technology horizontal axis, so very similar to offshore wind turbines where you have a 3-bladed turbine on a horizontal axis generating electricity from tidal flows. We also have kite technology, which is where we often see the kind of kites in a circular motion generating electricity, and horizontal axis technology as well. So a similar type of technology with a rotational torque that actually generates electricity. So a diversification of technologies, and that is critically important when we look at the receiving environment into which we're to put them. Interestingly, it's not well known that we have over 65 gigawatt hours of tidal stream generated electricity on the UK grid. We have led in this area for a number of years, since around 2008, and I'm going to take you on a brief historic tour of the technologies that have been deployed and developed, and the generation capacity that we've actually seen arise from those technologies. Really, really important is the point at which we commercialize the technology. And commercialization really is coming through revenue. So I will talk, and you'll hear a lot about contracts for difference, the amounts of megawatts that we've installed and that we are going to install in the UK, and how we're leading the globe in that race to really commercialize tidal stream technology. So a lot of information there in terms of CFDs awarded, but we're going to walk through this back to the beginning when tidal really was just an idea in terms of taking the fundamentals, a horizontal axis turbine or similar. In this case, the backdrop was a bidirectional permanent magnet generator turbine, but taking the fundamental principles of high levels of kinetic energy in our waters and turning that to electricity. So we've got a bit of a plotted history here, and the reason that I'm bringing this to your attention is I think it's really important that we understand that we are on a pathway. We're on a pathway to commercialization of this technology that is really, really important, and the cornerstone of that has happened in the UK, predominantly around our maritime interests, our heritage, and our capability, so our engineering skills that have diversified from shipbuilding and from maritime builds and onshore technologies to be able to actually move this through to commercialization. So you'll see there some of the major wins that we've had in terms of the early 2000s, deployments of technology in Loch Linnhe in Scotland, proving the fundamentals. So the principle is, can you actually take kinetic energy from water and turn it into electricity? We then had the European Marine Energy Centre open back in 2003. So they've been operational for quite a long time and have seen 19 different devices go through that centre. So that's based around the Orkney Isles. And that was really set up with foresight from Scottish Government to say, we need an area which can be developed where we can put multiple technologies into the water, test them, and start actually sharing and distributing that information. So EMEC opened for business. I'm pleased to say I was one of their first customers back in 2006 when we deployed that permanent magnet ring generator back in around that time. So Open Hydro, one of the first projects to get into the water. As you see, a very large rotational turbine that was mounted on a twin-piled structure with the view that we could raise and lower that into the very ferocious tides in the Fall of Warness at the European Marine Energy Centre. So there you're looking at a test centre where you have tides reaching about 4 meters per second, really, really incredible strength in the tides, and often if you stand on the platform you'd feel the vibrations through the actual platform of that structure. So testing and looking at what are the fundamental principles that will help this technology commercialise. Do we use twin-piled structures, or do we need gravity-based foundations? How do we operate in those environments? Which vessels do we need to use? What scale should we be moving this technology to? And again, the fundamentals of reliability, performance, power performance, and really everything from components through to how you put it in the water. So I think the European Marine Energy Centre is still the world-leading centre for tidal stream technology, but it's also allowed us to build a huge knowledge capacity in terms of what works and what doesn't. We also had CGen in Northern Ireland, and again, I was involved in that project from the beginning with ministers' briefings at the time. This is a monopile foundation with twin-bladed, so 2 rotors on either side that can be raised and lowered into the tide. It generated some 5 megawatt hours into the grid and was very, very successful in terms of its engineering. Bristol-based company, MCT, who built that technology, put it in, again, a very challenging site. So Strangford Narrows, as you know, very, very high tidal flows, also a high degree of environmental sensitivity, hence the ministerial briefings. So they managed to install that and really run the machine for a number of times, looking at environmental impact, looking at how the operation of the turbine might be used to actually bring the technology forward and look at reliability. So there, the design changes and the thought process around what's needed to commercialize technology began. So that early sort of first 10 years of development was really, really critical. The next stage, we saw an influx of predominantly horizontal axis turbines. So very much taking the principle of a small rotor and PTO that you could transport to site and deploy in some method. So whether that be a single monopile or pinned driving into the seabed, as some of the devices took, or whether it was actually putting a very large gravity-based foundation and lowering that onto the seabed. The fundamental principles of how to do that in high tidal flows being learned at the European Marine Energy Centre and in sites like Ramsey Sound in West Wales, where we saw the Delta Stream device deployed. The degree of innovation that arises from doing this is incredibly important. So access to sites has always been very, very important for the industry. Being able to prove at scale that you can deploy something, that it stays where you have put it, that it has power performance matrices that you can populate, and that your system is reliable is incredibly important. The learning derived from this period was really, really incredible. It was a fundamental step change in the engineering capability of the industry. And you'll see a lot of very familiar looking devices there in terms of the design and the horizontal axis. But it was here really that the industry started to understand things like levelized cost of energy. So where does this technology fit in that matrix of decarbonisation that we need going forward? And at the time, the focus was very much around cost of energy. So the current position, over those periods, we saw a lot of public funding, public money come into technologies. So a lot of grant funding through ERDF and other Horizon 2020 programs, funding the development of single devices deployed at various sites around the UK. The majority were in Scotland. We did have some in Wales, but really looking at proving the concept of tidal technology going forward. What was lacking from that was really access to revenue. So the companies were receiving grants to get them to a certain point in the technology development pathway or the technology readiness levels. They then had to become more mature and think about how to commercialize the technology. And that really is where the Marine Energy Council came in and the industry came together to start sharing knowledge and capacity. So very much around 2015, we saw the contracts for difference system come into play. And it did not consider marine energy. So this was not part of the structure of contracts for difference, so they were not accessible to tidal technology companies. At that time, we saw a real hiatus in the ability of technology to commercialize. So we were beginning to understand that the technology needed high levels of capital to get it in the water, to move it forward, and to start scaling. And we'll come back to this, but economies of scale are absolutely critical for the marine energy industry. No access to revenue, technology proven in conceptual stages, but needing now to scale to multiple devices, thinking about things like integration, storage, where the power would actually be taken, so power offtake, where we were going to see the power actually come ashore. And these sites were often very distributed around the UK, so from Orkney to the west coast to the Isle of Anglesey. Not great grid infrastructure. How do we meet those levelized costs of energy? And what was really asked for, what the industry was asking for at the time, was a route to market. So an ability to deliver the projects and the technology at scale, to start thinking about commercially building technology, having the correct infrastructure to do that. And we must remember this was at the time when fixed offshore wind was really seeing a huge growth potential. So we had various development areas being undertaken, a high degree of deployment. So very, very challenging to bring the view at the time of rapid decarbonisation by the use of offshore wind, back to really the core, which is utilisation of oceans for energy production. We went through a process during the 2020s, so 2019 through to 2020, of discussing this with UK government. And what was interesting was the sparsity of information that had come from the technology side into the policy side. So often we were seeing intellectual property issues, we were seeing other issues around sharing knowledge and power capacity and power curves that meant that government didn't understand the unique benefit of tidal stream. You'll see as we go through, because I'm going to say it a number of times, that we've now been successful in securing a ring-fenced CFD. The first was in the administrative round 4, so 2 years ago, to really help develop the technology. And there's actually 130 megawatts of contracted capacity in tidal stream that will come online in the UK before 2030. So an incredible amount, and often when we're asked, where is tidal stream at? Well, we have 65 gigawatt hours onto the grid, so we're generating electricity, predominantly from sites in Scotland, and we also have 130 megawatts in development and ready for deployment. I want to talk about some of the technologies because I think that is critically important, and we are seeing some convergence around technology types. But again, this is only done by learning. So the learning rate for marine energy at the moment is about 25%. For renewable energy, learning rates are normally around 17%. So a very, very high degree of learning, and I think anyone who's involved in the maritime industry will know that that comes from doing. So it is not until you put something in the water that you can really understand how it operates, its reliability, its performance capability, and its longevity. So those are the areas within which tidal energy is now focused, and those are the areas where we're seeing a lot of innovation come in terms of both technology types, so material science through to performance of blades and others. So there's a huge amount of innovation still happening. But in front of you are 3 of the companies that have really led the way. So Nova Innovation, Orbital Marine Power, and SAE Renewables have really focused on horizontal axis 3-bladed turbines. With Orbital and with Nova, with Orbital you have a floating technology, so really looking at those higher speed flows that are at the surface of the water where we're not seeing any kind of residual tension at the seabed. And the other 2 are bottom-mounted technologies. Both have been successful in putting in arrays, and we're seeing Nova Innovation really take things forward in Shetland, with SAE Renewables having the Magen project, which is the largest tidal technology site in the world. So an incredible amount of innovation has gone into these technologies, and an incredible amount of knowledge has been generated by the deployments we've seen to date. I just wanted to touch on the floating technology, though, the O2. And the reason this is interesting is around local content. So this device was built and deployed out of a shipyard in Dundee. It is towable, so it is a surface-mounted floating structure with 2 turbines, 2 horizontal axis turbines, and either one of the wings that you see there. Incredible engineering that allows it to be held in tidal flows. It's seen generation from waves, it's seen generation from tidal flows up in EMEC. And the next stage for this technology are multiple devices in a site generating and looking at integration. So whether that is hydrogen production, whether it is direct to grid generation, whether it is battery storage, how we integrate this technology onto the grid is going to be critical. And this site is between in the Fall of Warness is the Isle of Edy and the mainland of Orkney. Incredibly remote, incredible tidal flows, and if you get the opportunity, I would certainly advise visiting. An incredible site to see how British maritime engineering is really pushing forward the boundaries of tidal technologies. But here we're seeing a fundamental principle of a technology that is accessible, that has turbines that work, that understand the receiving environment, but also understand how they're going to deliver those electrons onto the grid. And again, that requires integration. It requires us to work collaboratively, both onshore and offshore, and have the facilities and the vessels to be able to go out and maintain and operate this technology. It's a growth area, and I think the global opportunity needs to be thought about. We're largely limited in the UK by about 11.5 gigawatts of potential tidal capacity. And that is the developable capacity. So that's where we're not seeing constraint mapping coming on board from things like environmental, social, shipping, other uses of areas, and resource potential. So we know that the global market for tidal technology is around 76 billion. That would mean technology deployed all over the world. And at the moment, the UK leads in the development and the manufacturing of this technology, and we have the skills and knowledge to be able to export that. So the export potential is absolutely clear. We've got a diverse supply chain. So in order to build these technologies, we know that the supply chain is distributed from the Isle of Wight on the southern coast right up into the Isles of Shetland. Both vessels, O&M, component testing, environmental science, legal support. We really do have a very, very diverse supply chain. And the reason that that is interesting is that we're seeing about 89 to 90% of UK content in tidal energy projects at the scale they are today. That compares to something just below 50% for fixed and floating offshore wind. So it has incredible potential for socio-economic development, for development and diversification of our maritime skills, and for really building an industry here that is exportable globally. We need to reach higher TRL levels, and we can only do that by deployment. So more deployment, incredibly important. But the Crown Estates have at the moment 1 gigawatt of leased areas for tidal stream technology. So this is not an emerging or nascent technology, it is a technology that is on the brink of commercialization. Just to talk about some exciting news that we had possibly 2 weeks ago. So AR6, Administrative Round 6, is the latest round of contracts for difference. So contracts for difference are the uplift between the market rate for technology and electricity supplied by that technology and the uplift that you would need to make them commercially viable projects. So there's a delta there between the two projects. And what contracts for difference were set up to do is really to support and bolster the renewable energy industry. I mentioned before that contracts for difference were not accessible to marine energy in the first 3 rounds. So we managed to secure a ring fence. That means we're not competing with other technologies at a similar level of cost. We have a ring fence within which tidal competes almost exclusively. So this is the 3rd round of administrative rounds that we've been able to access. And it's really showing the eligible capacity of these sites. So lead time to develop a tidal energy site is around 10 years. We've been involved in this industry for a long time, developing the areas that you see around that map to ensure that they have the correct resource. We've done environmental impact assessments. We've looked at grid connection. We've gained leases for seabed use. And we're seeing another 28 megawatts in the last round. So as I mentioned, I think we've got 128 megawatts now contracted, almost 130 megawatts in the contracts for difference moving forward. We're seeing new technologies. Magellanes, the top picture you'll see there, it takes very much a fundamental vessel that has a tidal turbine underneath it. So again, another floating technology that can allow that kinetic energy to be extracted. Hydrowing being a really interesting concept which allows multiple turbines on a single subsea base. It will also orientate itself into the tide, so it's maximizing the ability through the ebb and flood tides. And we know that tides are predictable, which is incredibly important again, and I'll touch on that later. So these are the projects that have been awarded. It's an incredibly successful round for the marine energy industry. And what we're hoping is that this position for tidal stream technology will prove that there are mechanisms in revenue systems to bring forward other technologies such as wave. What I wanted to talk about here was cost of energy. So we're often asked, why has marine energy not really been developed at scale so far? What have been the key challenges? And I think really we need to look at the policy landscape and what has happened here too with. And predominantly we've been looking at cost of energy. What cost of energy doesn't do, and for those of you involved in the energy industry, levelized cost of energy is a very long and complex calculation that takes into account both your OPEX and your CAPEX and the lifetime of the project, any depreciation and other areas that you need to consider. Marine energy has a very high levelized cost of energy at this stage in its progression to commercialization. And so what we have seen is really a mismatch of funding, of revenue potential, and technology readiness. And that has been critically important in stalling the industry. With the correct commitment, as we've seen through these rounds of CFDs, we're now starting to see a considerable amount of technology come online. So we need to continue that. If we want to continue the supply chain mobilizing to meet the marine energy need, if we want to see jobs creation, and we know that we're talking about a fairly significant economic return to the UK economy invested in this technology with some 4,000 jobs by 2030. There's also the area of diversification in terms of our existing maritime technologies moving over into these areas. Then we need to think about price, and we need to think about economies of scale. So bringing the technology so there is more of it, so that we are producing more of it and it becomes cheaper. We now have the segue between GB Energy, the new publicly funded energy company, and the Crown Estates, where the industry hopes that strategically we will be reviewing what is needed to bring this technology to commercialization. I think it's fair to say the technology has done enough in terms of proving its power potential, in terms of proving its economic benefit. We know, for example, that the likes of the European Marine Energy Centre, with those 19 tested devices, so it's a test centre for actually putting devices in the water, has generated around 300 million into the UK economy, and that's from testing singular devices. Therefore, the multiples of that could come from deploying at scale are significant. So we're keeping a watching brief on GB Energy. We're working with the Crown Estates in terms of what we need for the sector. And we're really hopeful that we'll see a strategic plan. As with everything, as with every new technology and every need for a new industry, excuse me, we're really hopeful that there will be a roadmap and a strategic plan to take this industry forward. So the work is not done. I just wanted to talk about a forward look, and this is some work that I do with the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult. But we know that we need more energy. We know that we need more electricity on the grid. And what do we really want that energy to do? Well, we want it to be cheap enough that we can all afford it, but we also want a return from it. If we're to develop an industry, it needs to be creating economic benefit close to the region of deployment. And it also needs to be providing those jobs and skills that not only diversify our workforce, but create new skills and new opportunities. Marine energy has a very high chance of doing that. And the reason it does is that we're looking at highly skilled jobs in a very specific environment, but one that we already have fantastic baseline knowledge capacity in. We are a maritime nation. We have the best engineers, the best offshore operators. So we're hopeful that marine energy can provide a very high level of job creation per megawatt installed. And that differs from other areas, it differs from other industries, and is really specific to the fact that we have resources around our coastlines that are proximate to major areas of maritime infrastructure and skills. I've mentioned this a number of times, but I think we've already demonstrated our capability. What we need now is growth. And this article really was shared predominantly with the UK government to raise awareness, but happy to share post-event with anyone who may want to read it. If we're to reach decarbonisation, I fundamentally believe we have to have a consideration of marine energy. And the reason for that is the balancing costs and the way that the grid works. So we may be able to achieve significant amounts of penetration of renewables with solar and offshore wind, and certainly they are hugely important. Our step to floating offshore wind is critically important in terms of our ports and our infrastructure development, and we're seeing really good strategic planning for that coming forward. But tidal energy is unique, and it is unique because it is predictable. And what predictability does is reduce cost in terms of your balancing cost on the grid. So if you know when your tide is going to flow, and you can predict up to 100 years in advance using the correct harmonic metrics, when tidal energy will produce you energy and will produce you power, then you can reduce the cost of your grid. So you need less of it. And that is even more compounded by the use of wave with offshore wind, where we see the two complementary measures. There are now quantifiable data to prove the metrics around this, and there are several papers that we can cite that set this out. But it is not that marine energy or tidal energy in particular is a nice to have. We will need to have tidal energy and wave energy in our UK energy system if we're to meet our 2050 goals. I wanted to talk a little bit about social acceptance, because I think this is critically important as well. And when we're talking about society in the sea, we need to talk about our social license to go and put things in the water. When we first started developing technology, and I've been involved with most of the major technologies that have come through, the biggest risk was underwater collision with marine mammals, destruction of fisheries, so impact on fishing livelihoods and the ability of people to fish in an area, and navigational risk. And this is an interesting story from the Bay of Fundy. So we deployed the first 1 megawatt turbine in the Bay of Fundy, very similar to the Bristol Channel in terms of huge tidal range, huge tidal flows. And in some of the tidal narrows in Canada, in the Bay of Fundy, which is on the east coast, close to Halifax, there are significant tidal flows. So Canada followed the UK in terms of setting up a centre for deployment, Fundy Ocean Research Centre for the Environment. And if you can remember that, you get a gold star. But this was a project out in the Bay of Fundy. And you'll see on the right there is a response from the fishing community. High value fishing community, both lobster and finfish in the Bay of Fundy. And they were critically concerned that this turbine in particular would be capable of destroying fish populations. Really a residual concern from large-scale barrage, the Annapolis barrage at the upper reaches of the Bay of Fundy, that fish populations were going to be damaged, and their key word, and I saw many of these driving around Nova Scotia and Halifax, was grinding Nemo. We went to judicial review on this, but what is interesting really is now the industry has that level of data. It has quantifiable data and evidence to really demonstrate not only its environmental impacts, but its social impact. So I mentioned the European Marine Energy Centre and the impact they have had in terms of GVA and economic growth. When I started visiting Orkney back in 2006, I have seen huge amounts of growth, not only just from the deployment of technology, but in hotels, in terms of food, in terms of vessels, in terms of infrastructure, ports and harbours. So the impact is great, but we only learn this by putting things in the water. So it is so important that we have this continuity, not only from a technology development perspective, but from a social acceptance and a licensing perspective, that we can put technology in the water, we can learn from it, and we can take that data and move forward in stakeholder engagement. The middle picture there, we did a scientific paper looking at what fish do around turbines. So we then took that data over to Canada, and the transferability of data and the knowledge that we have here in the UK about the effects of these turbines, both underwater sound, diving seabirds, and how they impact local communities, is really, really key to seeing this global industry take off. Electricity market reform, I won't bore too many people, we're talking about society in the sea, but this is very much around where the industry needs to be. So we have technology, we've engineered it to go into the receiving environment, we've got that 130 megawatts coming online, we need continuity of the market to make sure that we can deliver that technology at a price that is acceptable to society and really meets the need of the grid going forward. So we will be working to think about non-price criteria and other interesting levers that can be pulled in electricity market reform and CFDs. But really it's about collaboration. It's about understanding the opportunity. And this will feed out into both small-scale vessels that will need to be used in operations and maintenance. It goes into science in terms of understanding the receiving environments. We have much better knowledge now about those very intense dynamic environments that heretofore probably wouldn't have been surveyed as extensively if we weren't looking at extracting electricity for them. And we found some very interesting facts and figures. We actually found the oldest lobster that had been recorded in Orkney sitting underneath a tidal turbine one day. So there's incredible knowledge being derived from doing this. And the art of doing is really important in terms of innovation. But we need the market, we need the technology to keep moving. We need not to have a return to 2015 when focus was taken away from this opportunity. And as a maritime nation, I ultimately believe we need to continue with Tidal Stream to see the roaring success that's been so far. I've talked about the benefits to the economy and that Wave can follow suit, not only to the UK economy, but to the global economy. So if we can export this technology and our skills and services globally, we'll be following very closely on the back of the oil and gas success. The extent of what we need in terms of persistent offshore power, in terms of decarbonising island communities, in terms of remote generation is huge, and there's a real role for Tidal Stream to play. If we think about the Gulf of Alaska, if we think about the communities there, we think about some of the northwestern straits in America, China, France, Japan, Korea, there is incredible markets for Tidal Stream Energy out there. I believe we can find a price point and we can test the technology here. We can build knowledge capacity based on our fantastic engineers, our third-party tertiary education and the good knowledge that we're getting there, our environmental resources, but also how do we ensure, how do we warranty these technologies? All of these things the UK is leading in, and globally we are viewed as a centre of excellence for this technology. So in summary, I think Tidal Stream as a technology has a huge role to play in decarbonising our future. I think it has a huge role to play in the blue economy in terms of our ability to move forward and have economic growth in the maritime. I hope that has been insightful, and I am more than welcome to take any questions via my email or after the event. But I do hope that you will keep tidal energy in mind when you're considering how we use our seas and the benefits to society. Thank you.